Welcome to this session. It's the early career researcher work on writing an abstract. I'm Diana Johns.
I'm Dave McDonald. We're both in criminology here at the University of Melbourne. I know those in the room, obviously. Oh, we haven't met. So those in the room know Diana, but me, and those online won't know me, but probably know you still. And just to kind of introduce this session, so we were asked by Jen. So one of the was asked if we would put together this session, which has come about based on feedback that's been received from PCRs over the last few years. So,
what does that say? I am a native.
I'm pleased you asked. So, early career researchers, so be they current and postgrad students participating in the conference or academic staff.
Yeah.
But really, so there's been some feedback along the way to think about how a little bit more support can be given to people participating in the conferences, perhaps for the first time or being new to new-ish, and anyone else who might be interested in coming together to talk about, what makes a good abstract. So, that's what we're doing here today.
Yeah, and although it's ECR, I think it's actually just for all of us a really useful reminder to reflect on how we do what we do. Part of academic work is writing abstracts, presenting our work, but we often just sort of go along and do it without sort of reflecting on how we do it and why we do it and how we might do it a little more intentionally and creatively and confidently in ways that that can be useful for us and in developing our own voice, our own style, in our work, but also useful for colleagues when going through millions of, you're hosting a conference, for example, or editing a journal and you're receiving people's work. It make it easier for our colleagues to read something that's nice and concise and actually says what you want it to say, rather than scribbling out a bit of waffle that we sometimes can tend to do if we're rushed. Or so I think it's sort of meeting a few needs.
Yeah, and in the context of an event like this, where there's interest that couldn't be met, to debate the abstract, people who was not selected could continue point event. And just very important point that everyone can benefit from. Sort of polishing in relation to some of these aspects of writing.
Yeah, we'll come to this. I mean, sort of want to do a few things before we get into the meat of it, but we will just have a fairly informal, chat. Make it as much of that as possible. And so that'll be Dave and I chatting, and then you just kind of butting in at every moment. But I think just in terms of the context for what you were just talking about, as Claire said yesterday, we were overwhelmed with abstracts. The last international conference for Carceral Geography, I think they had 30 or 35 papers, and we received over 200. So we did knock back.
How many did you choose?
Chose 150 or something. Like we knocked back about 70. We could have accepted all of them, but we just couldn't physically. So in that respect, it does matter how you kind of craft your message about what you want to say, who you're saying it to, and how it will fit with the overall themes of the conference. So in that respect, I think it's useful to reflect on how we write an abstract.
And perhaps one of the other things you can come back to is how the abstract for a conference looks in relation to something like an abstract for a journal article that might come out of that, and so speaking to those different audiences and trying to pitch work across different outlets, journals and audiences. So that's some stuff, but we can come back to it. The idea is that it's kind of workshop focused, so it'll be a discussion amongst all of us. I'm particularly interested in hearing, we all read abstracts, we all read academic material, so we can all share thoughts about what makes a good approach versus perhaps a weaker approach. Seasoned academics share their perspectives.
Before we go any further, we've got something
exciting to follow.
So please ask questions, chat along at any point.
Are we doing this now?
Go ahead and right timing.
Well,
But
we hoped to have somebody in the room.
Yes. So we will come back to this, and it has been announced already by Claire on Twitter. through the-
Okay.
But we were asked as part of this event as well, to form
To announce that Bronte Alexander has been awarded the best postgraduate paper prize of 2022. From the Carceral. She was going to be on Zoom, but I don't think she is. Bronte, are you in the room with us? I don't think so. But that's a bit strange, but anyway. We can just acknowledge.
And, one thing I would encourage any postgraduate students to think about is submitting for the next iteration of the award. So there's some information on the website in relation to what constitutes a paper. It's not necessarily a published paper, drawn from a PhD. It can be a conference paper that's been written up and is submitted from the prize block with PowerPoint. So it's worth having a look. Maximum 5,000 words to submit. So it's not hugely onerous. The illustrious prize of a £50 voucher.
Eternal fame.
Sorry.
Eternal fame.
Yeah, well, this could be minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just because the workshop was advertised as turning an abstract into an article, and I mean you already connected it now. So, like, if it's possible to focus not only what to promise, but then what should you do with that promise?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah. That's good. So then we into the article. Talk about that. Let's introduce ourselves first. We've introduced ourselves. Keegan, would you like to start?
I'm a PhD student here at Intl in political theory. Yep. Yep, that's not what was relevant.
I'm Gabby. I'm a criminology PhD here. Guys, my supervisor. And my research is on women's experiences of remand. So yeah, interested in women's experience in of remand, like being sentenced.
Yeah, hey, I'm Julia. I'm a clinical psychologist and human geographer from Frankfurt, Germany. Coming to Australia for the conference, brilliant conference. I'm in the third PhD year, and I'm also working for blah blah blah. And I'd like to publish a paper soon.
And I'm Associate Professor Danielle Tyson from Deakin Criminology, my PhD at Melbourne. So I've got a history with Melbourne, and so say what we do, area of research. I've done a little bit of work with Emma Russell on bail, and working on at the moment on women who kill and strategies of good lawyering and expert evidence of family violence.
I've read your papers with Emma.
Yeah, okay, yeah, whatever.
I use them a lot.
Emma's amazing, yeah. Yes, but and Philistine. Yeah. Just been doing 2 years research with the Institute for 2 years, which is also based at Deakin University. And one of the projects I'm lately working on is looking at historical and contemporary far right, so radical nativist actors' uses of environmental politics in Australia. Some of this, particularly on some of the papers about Australian early colonial histories, confinement, anything in connection with White Australia policy, regionalism. It's been really interesting.
Well, we thought we'd start with something big fun. I was like, do we need to establish a bit more trust before we do this? I was like, no, I think we've established quite a bit of trust so far in the work, and it's not that, no? I think it's fine. Tell me if it's not. Can we see it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think this was shared with me the other day. It's sort of a name for the very big paper. But those like social sciences, you put into your first initial, second initial, your birth month, and optionally you can begin with the last text message.
What was that?
So what is the vague title of your paper? Your first initial, so D would be a reading of, so this is the vague title, this making it together. Then your last initial, so Tyson N, but so yours would be D, a reading of N power structures, your birth month, Danielle's not, but as coded queerness. The next vague title of your
This
paper.
is the key.
Put
It's
a
perfect abstract.
prefix, colon, your last text message. It's just a kind of a fun, like mine is a reading of the self as a form of erasure. I could put that in. It makes
Next time as a kind of business.
It's like bullshit word generated.
Okay. It's an okay. Colon. Representations of spaces as a form of erasure. See that? Okay.
Oh, I never read it.
So if you remain in company now.
And I kept thinking,
Erasing.
very fun. Erasing. How close?
Erasure. You're raising a
Erasing, erasure.
Very Peter.
Yeah, very, it's very desperate.
If you were born in September, you'll have erasing erasure. Erasure.
Very impressive. Doing absolutely nothing. So few people often do that.
What is that about the text method? Will everything look it up and then it's like, oh, words.
Yeah.
So your last text message, colon, and then at this bit.
Oh, wow. I don't know. I said a couple of things.
A reading of signs, intersection.
A reading of.
So is this about everyone can in a bit of time have a super title for without any idea what they want to do?
What you do?
Well, all of the ones that come up with variations on here say that actually what it does.
Reflect all your day.
Well, we forgot identifying power structures as performance. Well, then if we go to the last trend, identifying whereas representation is performance, identifying percentage performance.
Need a research.
Interesting. But it's also about the sad that's so like important ideas for the constructs as a gay for gender can just be so ridiculous with
Yeah.
something with gender.
Your last text me was that I meant the executive decision. Power structures as performance.
So that's interesting, quite telling. I think this is quite a good little reminder that it's easy to be complex. It's actually we often feel that we're not enough. We're just saying simple things and saying things. But I think what I've really loved about this conference is the way it's brought so many people from so many disciplines, but also from so many practice settings and experience, which means that we have to speak more clearly and lose our own discipline of jargon to be able to communicate. Fluid and open. So I think it's a good reminder to translate that into plain language. I think it's useful in the writing abstracts and writing anything actually. To think about that we could be better researchers and better writers if we can do that translation. For example, Indigo saying this morning how epistemic justice for her, when she heard that word, oh, thank you for that language, that now I have a word for this thing, feeling that experience that I've been having. But actually just using the words, the terms, doesn't necessarily give us a sense of the experience. So the word, the language, the complex conceptual framing of things can also obfuscate and hide some of the actual experience and the meaning of those things. I think, and sometimes we default to terms, assuming that everybody knows what we're talking about as if we're saying the same language when we're not.
Yeah.
It's like, neoliberalism. Oh, we know what that is. No, we don't. What are we actually talking about? You know what I mean? There's those shorthand things we assume are common language.
Yeah, I think all of us, regardless of where we are and what we're doing, scholars can benefit from thinking about how to, communicate to different audiences, why audiences,
and different pieces of work can be pitched to different audiences. So how you translate ideas, thinking about, and isn't always easy. I remember the first time I read a challenge was really, the first time I experienced a challenge with writing was when I was working in government alongside my PhD, and I was very, at that point I was a very confident academic writer, but it was when I was trying to write a public report for a public audience, and I'd never done that before, and it was a real challenge to be able to master that. So for me, there's been something in that we can become accustomed to styles of writing as a genre. And I know from the institution that I'm at that writing to different audiences is valued, communicating our ideas to different audiences. And there's something to be said for trying to sort of continually work on that. And when it comes to approaching conference like this, as opposed to, say, a more kind of conventionally chronological audience, I have to think about, the piece of work that I want to present, want to share, and how to situate that in the context of, the scholars, the activists, the thinkers who will be coming together in things like this. So, we translate our work in all sorts of different ways on a regular basis.
One way to do this is to just be forensic with the red pen. Editing, just speaking words in a way that you would speak to if you had a child, a stranger, and an academic colleague in the group, how you might speak in a way that everybody could hear you. Like that would be a challenge. So thinking about your audience means that you have to kind of translate into simple language. And sometimes it's just reducing the number of words. So something like this is just I used to do this to my first year students, but it's actually really helpful to kind of get over ourselves sometimes, to just think about where can we use one word instead of five. And all those, just using simple. I heard somebody say once, I'm so aware of it now, hearing myself and hearing way in which academics say way in which instead of how.
the way in which forward, it's how, the way in which we do something, how we do it. We don't need to say it. We say that, we embroider everything, to give it more gravitas, to make it sound as though we're saying, with a fear that saying less or saying things more simply or more clearly is somehow not enough. I think just translating to really clear, simple, reduced words.
I was just thinking, because today when people said like, okay, epistemic injustice, I am not listening to because of my identity. What you or what we do in this case is like putting on the identity of a researcher academic due to like this kind of talking, as if we hadn't this kind of talking, we just would be a white woman with age or I think it's also a form of trying to defend against this form of just being the identity that you are without all that academic background or you.
Yeah. No, yeah. So do you mean it's a sort of a it's pulling down about it?
Making your identity bigger than it is, or
Yeah.
although you might not need it.
I'm just trying to back this better question here.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was so interesting about that sort of anecdote of that concept was that, you know, the concept is supposed to describe an experience. And, you know, there's a problem with how, it points to a problem with how we might use concepts to get in the way of experience. So, you know, similar to describing having that experience, the terminology around it. So I think, you know, thinking about this in the context of this workshop in relation to abstracts and like, you know, it's sort of useful, but also something to incorporate into our writing, which
Expression, speaking as well. There is definitely a way we build up an academic identity.
So when you just said that about the way in which, now I just want to go back to the thing that I submitted last week. The way in which it looks like, because there are a few in there.
Simple example, but you'll be so aware of it now. You'll hear it everywhere. Why do we do that? How? It's fine. So this is sort of building up to advice that so I used to, when I was in RMIT, I used to work at RMIT, and a woman called Carla Kane, this is where I got this from, but we used to do some writing workshops, journal writing, abstract writing, and she would always, this is her kind of prescription for writing an abstract. And I think it's really useful, and we'll reflect on why, because there are lots of ways you can, you know, lots of little formulas and tips you can find about writing an abstract. But I think the first two elements of this are really important. And I was saying today, it's kind of, this goes against the way I like to work. I'm not restricted, 25 words here, 50 words there, that's not how I roll. But I think it's a little bit like becoming, you know, an expressionist. You've got to learn the kind of, if you're a painter, say, you have to learn the technique first. I think it's a useful kind of technique to learn to then be able to make your own and find your voice.
And this is a very prescriptive approach, even if it's not, you know, you don't dream about adopting this kind of prescriptive approach. It might still be useful to reflect on, you know, what an abstract video has looked like in comparison to like this. Does it have the different components? But what I found useful when you kind of showed me this was how it captures in my head how I try to use abstracts and how I talk to students about an essay structurally, what it looks like, or what a thesis looks like. So that kind of beginning using an introduction for a longer piece of writing, an essay, a thesis, in terms of the inverted pyramid, the body being the kind of the specific focus of the work, and then the conclusion doing almost the opposite to the introduction. So when I write an abstract, I typically try to do the same thing, which is to think about, you know, this question of audience. I wouldn't have thought of it in using those terms, but that's essentially what I'm doing. So what is the broader kind of scholarly debate or perspectives that I'm mentioning, a piece of work that I've done or I'm doing in relation to, and how does that fairly discrete piece of work speak to that broader context, hopefully add to that context. And so it's trying to essentially do that, identify the audience, identify the knowledge of the terrains that I'm speaking to, and then describing the work that I'm doing in specific terms, and then trying to locate the contribution of that, what I found, back within that context.
I think, so the first point is, who is my target audience? Second one is, what is my main message? Back to that. What should I do? How do I do it? Where do I find what the information and so forth? So the last four are the point, stock standard, summing up whatever you talk about. Those first two, I think they're the challenge. And if we can master that, then you can write a really good, clear, concise expression of what you want to say in particular case, which is what that shows us. But of course, there's writing an abstract for the conference and writing an abstract for writing an abstract for all sorts of things. But if we're thinking about the conference versus the writing an abstract for the journal, I think the first question is the same but slightly different. So the target audience, as you said, Dave, when you're publishing to publish, when you're writing to publish and put something out into the world, you're thinking about what is the conversation that you want to intervene into, that you want to enter into. So that question, who is my target audience, is actually really important, because you almost have to visualize some of the key voices in the field, who and how you want to address them. Not just this, often we just sort of do a generic thing. This is inviting us to actually really specifically think about maybe the editor of the journal, maybe other people who published in the journal we want to publish in. Who are those people and what do you want to say to them? So you might say, this is what you know, but this is less known or something. So you're bringing your angle. In terms of the conference, we were talking about, we might do. Last 2 weeks ago was the Anzac conference. Dave, you did the same kind of presentation, but the way you presented at an Anzac conference, which is kind of a bit of a more straight-laced criminology conference, is different from how you're communicating what you want to say in the Carceral geography conference. And although you might not have done the thing written the abstract differently, actually you probably should have, thinking about the fact that it's a totally different audience. And for a bunch of Carceral geographers, who are all of us, we're not, not necessarily just geographers, it's people with experience of all these different dimensions. And it's been all these different disciplines. It means thinking outside your own, outside your sort of visual frame of possibly the language or the jargon or the concepts that you might enter the work within your discipline, and thinking about how do I communicate this? What do I want to say? And how am I going to do it in ways that people hear me? And not just ditch my abstract on the main file or the not this time file. Really important. I've submitted abstracts. I have once I've submitted an abstract to a conference. And it was rejected. It was like, rejected. I was just like, what? It wasn't in my head, it was. But the way I communicated what I was going to say didn't land with the people designing the conference, designing the program, even though I thought it was a really great thing.
And I'm thinking, why this matters is partly to for a conference, but also influences where we end up with the conference. So panels are based on double papers, and how the title of the paper possibly are. I don't really read abstracts. I'm not very good at reading abstracts for determining what I would can, but that can influence. Just others come to that session.
Do you write abstracts whether I want you to have already done or is it from things that you might not be able to keep?
It's a great question. So like, you know, there's a spectrum of approaches when it comes to that. Yeah, often having to do this far in advance. So, you know, 6 months perhaps or longer, 9 months. So on the one hand, we might say, okay, like I'll have this kind of polished piece of work by this time, possibly already published it. So I'm going to present on that. Or on the other hand, you can use that to be ambitious and say, like, by that point, when I've done that work, this is what motivates me to do that work. And what I want from it, from the work, is some feedback as I'm working. So, so something that's, you know, essentially complete to something that's almost the opposite of that. There are different ways of doing it, and indeed, like where we're at individually might determine that approach. So for me, I think I've learned the hard way that so I think I've learned a couple of things actually. I used to try to be a little ambitious, so okay, this is motivate me to do the work. But then it's inevitably a very stressful experience leading up to the conference of late months before. And I think what I've come to realise is that you know, if you're working in a field, you know these fields, and actually by being able to kind of, you know, a 15 or 20 minute, 25-minute presentation is very, very short, and you know, actually we don't need to have done a huge amount of work to present. It's quite a specific idea often that is the basis of a presentation. I'm not trying to be disrespectful with how we approach it, but in the context of 20 minutes or less, there's only so much you can do. And if part of that is to situate it, you know, I was thinking about how I speak to this project or this dimension of the project that I was talking about at this conference. And aspects of that just are not very groundbreaking for this community of thinkers that is coming together in this phase. Whereas I felt like 2 weeks ago at this Australian New Zealand conference, which is more empirical, less conceptual, it felt like a slightly newer idea. So even though it was almost the same piece of work, how I was presenting it, how I was situating it, and the audience I had in mind was very, very different between the two contexts. And yeah, I'm moving away from the question a little bit, but I think for me it depends on maybe the nature of the project I'm working on and what I want from it.
I think often with a conference, in paper presentation, we'll write the abstract, we'll write the examples. But with a journal article, we'll write the article, then we'll write the abstract. So it's a totally different thing. Carla, because an editor herself, nothing to do with criminology, but she's a very experienced editor. But she was bang on, and you must always be writing to the journal. Don't just write a piece and then, oh, now where am I going to send it? Have your audience in mind, have your journal, pick the journal that you want to write to, and write to that journal. So in that way,
But if they don't accept it,
and then you deal with that. Then you work out. Yeah, and then you decide, okay, now if I.
That's how I've had that experience. You send it to one journal and they reject your outright. So you go, okay, well, in that case, I'll send it to this journal, and then you might get 2 reviews, 5 pages of things to fix, and then they might send it to 2 other people who send you another 5 pages of things to fix, and they reject you. So then you might go, oh, now where? And you have to go and choose another journal to sort of work out. So that it's not always guaranteed, but it's a big plus. I think it's good to get a bit of rejection and understand it's very hard to take. Yeah, it's good. Anyway, like when you get say 2 or 3 views, what do you do if they complete each other? You address well,
A good editor should help that editor.
yeah.
But that doesn't always.
It depends what, I mean, I think it depends what they're saying. Like, and I have this exact situation with it right now with a colleague, And it's difficult, you sort of, I put them all on the table, I go through them and I go, yes, you can do that, and you know, look, that's rewriting the paper, no, I didn't do that enough. So I sort of break up that stuff and say, well, that's not what the paper was. And if you say, look, that's beyond the scope of the article, we didn't undertake that analysis, but that, thank you for raising that point, so always that was very helpful. The editor should accept that, shouldn't they, even though it's going to be. Yeah, unless, and if someone's really critical of me, they might actually say, we encourage you not to address the comments of review of 3. They'll let you know if they've been, they can do that, yeah.
So you can kind of say like, thank you for this comment, but this isn't actually what I was trying to do.
A little bit. I mean, I wasn't saying, I'm not sort of saying you're taking too much issue. What the reviews said is kind of have to take it on board, but I think I'm talking more about, oh, it would be lovely if you did attempted homicides as well as homicides. Like, well, I didn't do that. I'm not doing that.
And that is one sentence for the discussion.
Well, you could say further research, but you don't really. Yeah. I think there are things you can say. Tricky though.
I think as long as you don't ignore whatever's been said.
Yeah.
So just address everything. And then yes, I think it's a really good point. But within the scope of this paper, this, I'll just do this, or give the reason why it won't be rewriting the whole thing. But just don't ignore something. Yeah. Yeah. But I think it comes down then to, so again, if you're resubmitting, you might think, okay, well, this other journal, they have a slightly different emphasis, so I might just adjust, my sense of I'm writing to just change a word or two to reflect their answer scope. So you just write it to the journal, it's still writing the same things, but you're just addressing a different audience. So I think that goes to my first point again, what is my target audience? It's a really important place to start and to just come back to everyone.
And the other thing is, if you're in criminology, you're not always publishing a criminology journal. Yeah. So that's a good one. So if you said, yeah, to a criminology journal, that's different to a public studies journal, to a law journal. So I was saying to my colleague, well, maybe we should go to a criminology journal and not go back to a law journal.
So what else?
So that's a choose journal.
Yeah.
And I kind of insist that, okay, there's a couple of papers I read within the scope of the development paper, but not always there. But there's no call. Which certainly.
So, yeah.
What you like to read, where publish, where you go.
What you cited in the paper as well.
So yeah, I think there are a couple of strategies. One is, often you might have, if you are writing, if you're writing for a journal, thinking next step might be that you find who are the sorts of people that are wanting to speak to them, where do they come to the face. And if I just like, how might I try to maximize based on your advice, something like the language, how might I maximize the language that might be involved?
Early on in your career and student, you might go to so you might not go to the British Journal first up unless you're writing at that level, but you might go to the International Journal for example, because they publish work that's they're publishing your peers within Victoria and Australia, and the same with the ANZOC journal. So it's sort of, if you're presenting at the ANZOC conference, then people know you there, and they're more likely to go, oh, I can do that paper. They might be on the editorial. They might be one of the reviewers. They're part of your community. Whereas if you try to jump straight into a US journal, I'm just saying, but say violence against women, international journals, quite difficult to get in there, but can get in there. But it just depends, and it depends primarily for international audience, for international journals. So if you haven't, they're likely to reject you because you're not speaking to the international audience. So you're going for the local journal. So yeah, I guess there's all of that as well, depending on what you've been, what your work, who your work has been speaking to, and that's the audience, isn't it? Because if you, yeah.
Did you expect natural?
What was it? Less natural. It would cover that.
Yeah, so it was like saying, hey, you have this article as a client, or do you think it fits the scope of the journal just to have the first sort of contact? So that's saying,
I never know. I guess. Yeah, I'm. It might be happening at the time. It's an anonymous process, and I think that as a journal editor, we can just say, sure. But it depends what you bring. Like, it depends on all of the review process, whether it fits the journal or not. So the editor will decide on that. And I guess, yeah, I've never really. I mean, the only time you might go to that process would be perhaps for a special issue of a journal on Carceral geography, for example. You might say, well, I think we're going to go for that. It's very different. It's for the professional knowledge journals that have to publish and people are told to send it to that publish. So I don't do that with the photos.
yeah.
Although that's not true. I mean, I've published in one journal and I said, are you interested in follow-up articles? So, yeah, so that's the only thing. Oh, good.
And like my personal case now is that we have written a review on torture in the context of immigration detention, and it's a kind of follow-up review where the first review in 2013 was on torture survivors who have been detained in immigration detention with horrible outcomes. And then we say, okay, torture survivors who have survived torture prior to detention, so either on the flight or in their country of origin. But then, yeah, but wait, what if torture occurs within detention in the detention state? So then it was a broader question. Okay, now we have the review, and we have also place for this article already, but it is like, okay, this is our, the very community, so it's like critically converted. Okay. There is a super high quality, high ranked review journal, but I don't know if ever they would like this kind of review, and even if have a quite politicized language. So I would like to put that in that sense also that would you change directly some kind of the jargon, the language we use in the abstract or in the article itself?
Definitely something that like have a concept of the start of the journal and then direct your query, you know, frame it into overviews, but make it clear where it's coming from.
Journal editors might say, well, we've already published an article on this. And that's, I know that would be one reason we got rejected outright. The latest piece they published was from two professors who've written on that topic, and while our stuff is very different, they don't need an article like that. Alternatively, it could be that it fits in nicely because it picks up from their work, and so that, in that sense, then it's worth asking. Otherwise, they just like that. Yeah, they just reject us, and I have to go. Don't because they publish that next piece. Well, that's why. Because we have to spend this. But also you can find publishing in different journals. You'll be published.
Yeah.
Very also completely different apps.
So it's a review journal, trauma guidance and interviews, and
think, and the other thing I think is, you know, in your career, you might, like I've always dreamed of getting into a particular journal. I said, oh, one day I want to publish in that journal, one day I want to publish in that journal. That's like been 15 years. And eventually co-authored with somebody and we're published in that journal. But it's really, yeah. And it's like, what?
I was going to point more about, you know, that's one journal. I feel like we shouldn't, those researchers shouldn't discount the possibility of because, you know, the wonderful thing about where you are is that you kind of, you know, immersed over a few years, you know, be a project that, you know, you're really contributing to the field. Like that's the point of the PhD, that's what you're examined for. And if there's a key kind of like argument in the project, I really regret not doing that, not thinking or not sort of spending the time thinking about what's the most important, like what's the best to think about. If it doesn't come off, fine, if it doesn't come off, let's give it a go. And the other advice from really which I had received, or the thing I wish I had thought more about was how to title provide more.
And not to the
Title. I had the first page like
not the last text, the first thing.
I had one of the first thing I published. Was kind of vague title. Describe law and
Is that when you were PhD?
yeah, but I think that, you know, at that point, you know, so I can really, I think all of us should reflect on our experiences and think about how we go on to kind of mentor, and that's not really a criticism of anyone. I didn't even have a conversation about, you know, submitting this thing. I just kind of went together, I sent it to this journal, I never had a conversation about the right journal.
But you got published.
It got published and it was an 8-star journal at the time. So it was like, you know, get the four review.
Yeah, that's not getting to it, right?
But, you know, I like whether or not
Was it
that,
hazard? Was it, like, or whether it was a good piece and a good piece?
but whether it did, like, whether it did a lot for my CV and certainly it's title, it's something that's really important. It's called Ungovernable Monsters for Pedophilia. It doesn't tell you anything like that.
Yeah, but it grabs you though.
So it was a piece about post-sentence detention, how this new era of post-sentence era was came about, how it's been justified in relation to specifically that. I think you would look at that and think it's so things, it's not critical. Anyway, so. Use that, but fire, you know, that's what it's called.
Yeah, I was just gonna say another thing, and I don't know if you mind us borrowing on experience, but I think you talk about things you regret, and I think because I feel like we have a synergy with you having come from the Melbourne model, right? And I think one thing is, I think it took me a long time to find my voice to write the policy. And I only really did empirical research now, whereas I started out doing sort of structural critiques of law at Melbourne, and I still there's an abstract that is buried on Google of mine from about 1997 or something, and it's illegible, right? And one of the problems that I struggled with is was trying to deal with very complex theory at the time. You know, it's like NLP. Readings of law, which I was given the full fundamental concepts of psychology by Lacan to read. And I went, I don't understand it, but I couldn't write about that theory for many, many years, and I still maintain my PhD. Not something I'm sort of saying, okay, it's great. So, you know, and I still that stupid abstract. I can't get rid of it. But I've gone back to it. I was just on my nose going, I don't even know. It's anyway.
I don't think it would have won the prize.
Oh, I would have won the prize for the worst abstract, absolutely. And there's a paper that I'll never put on game Google to. It was a conference paper publication, so I'm going to point out it. But I'm not putting it on Google either because it suffers the same inability to explain theory. It's like being checked over for its own good. And there was, I guess, an arrogance in my writing because I was on to something and a good idea, but I just didn't like that. I sort of, but now I don't care about that. It's sort of like writing is a process, and you know, publishing your work, different audiences, it takes time to do that. And I think, you know, when I started out, my thesis actually says this thesis is not interested in the policy debates around, you know, the abolition of the provocation, defence, and homicide. Like, really? Oh, good for you, because who's going to read it? But now, you know, when I wrote the book on the thesis, which took 5 years, my is to actually rewrite the thesis in a way I was happy with, and I wrote a book. It was all to the policy audience because it's suddenly I haven't found my voice. You know, it took a long time. Just, you know, there were lots of other things in life too that meant, you know, I was trying to. It was not very hard to write. So I'm always really interested in now, very committed to helping my students and you know, colleagues. I write with people. I think writing is a conversation. It's and you should share your work. So before it gets to the journal, you should read the abstract. You know, you should be sharing it with people, giving feedback, so that you're not so you know, shocked when you get negative feedback, as constructive as it may be. And it's a shame. I have to laugh about it. What else can you do? You just have to go, oh, well, that's really embarrassing, but I wish I was clever at this, but I'm not supposed to.
Yeah.
Since I come to this second point, what is my main message? Too often, well, we're going through an article or a presentation. We're trying to say everything, we're trying to say everything. And you can only really say one thing or make like, you know, this point, this point, this point. Otherwise, it's just too much, it doesn't work. So this thing, if we can, I think the instruction to write in 25 words or less, what is my main message, is a real challenge, but it's a really good one because it forces you to crystallize things and to actually articulate what you're saying. Because if we all did that, then what is that?
I think that's true. It's the voicing it as well. So when you say it, you probably say it. One, you say it often more really than when you write it, because you get hung up in the genre of writing, which is a sentence that needs to, then the next one needs to follow on with the next one, but the topic sentence and the paragraph, which I did not learn until way later. When I was actually in academia, not even when I wrote PhD, it was only when I did the book that I went, I can't reach a paragraph next to topic sentence. Never heard of a topic sentence. You know, and so it's great in retrospect. But one thing I find useful is conference papers have PowerPoints, and PowerPoints have a few words underneath them. And once you structure your presentation, that really can be the structure of the journal. You know, so that's another way to separate out your ideas, like you know, the introduction, what's my main message on the first slide, use a bit of a literature review, this is the research design, what is it I did, how did I do it, these are one findings, this is an example, 3 examples. The implications are that this is the project that's ongoing, it's the project that's finished, the policy needs to change, but might not, you know, whatever it is. And that's following that step, but in the visual presentation. And then you can run up the article, hopefully.
Well, when it comes to presenting on what the main message is, you know, I don't want to set very clearly. So I think most people have experience of giving that presentation and having somebody completely miss that line somehow. And so I think, you know, sometimes it's clear that I think it might be something sometimes it helps to repeat the point a couple of times in a publication, sorry, in a presentation. I've just had a similar, but I thought that I really captured that line about my main message at the end of an introduction. I thought this is really interesting what this article does that others in the field don't do. And to come back again and say, you know, review one, great, review on two, but what do you like? You clearly understand.
Right, grammar was like, and sentence or but. Something like that.
And the other question I think there's something there, might be moving away from this a little bit, but you know, like what do we wish we knew? What have we found challenging? What do we understand that we wish that we, you know, I think all of that sort of thing, we don't always get the time and supervision to discuss these sort of things, you know, we're kind of checking about what we're working on rather than zooming out of it. And you know, another question I had is what to do with something from here from a reviewer. You know, they're referring you to ideas that you just don't know the answer to. Oh, I mean, that would be you know where to look, but what happens if you don't know what to look, you know, so I'm looking at these reports thinking, like, I'm not entirely sure. I thought I'd already gone looking for those answers. That scholarship, I can't find that. What do I do now? Mason's actually been quite really so you can say that other colleagues share it and what they think, if they can shed any light on that.
I mean, if it's that useful, and if it's going to be make or break the article, then sure, it's going to go investigate a whole new area of work, but likely it'll just be maybe a footnote or one line pointing to another body of work. Perhaps I don't imagine. I don't know if it's helpful.
Sorry, on feminist perspective on international law and that's okay, but then they've added on breakfast statement.
I was trying not to find my 1977. No, you don't go. You can't work with it. So funny though. I'm looking for it. Like I said, I put up in a class with a right do this. Or are you like, I found an example of it. I'm sharing the laughing about it with them, but I totally. Because it, you know, this whole thing about taking criticism, I think my experience was to get what was possibly, I probably realized that I wasn't clear in my mind, and I probably was too scared to accept that at the time, and I wish somebody had sort of been able to say, you know, you really need to be on top of something, it's not clear. But yeah, because I was so ashamed at the time, I didn't ask for help, I never shared my writing with anyone. So it took a long time and it took a long time to, as I say, I think to find my voice. And so now I'm all about helping people find, you know, what's the book of the article? Is it a case? Is it a different issue? Is it, you know, why do we care? What's the problem? Is that, yeah, and so is it yet another death? Is it yet another example of something that's been going on for a time? Is it, you know, push for a particular perspective, you know, approach, you know, like what's, I guess that's what, not necessarily a message, but why do we care? Like, are you rehashing something that's already been rehashed? Is the debate here and you don't like there?
Presentation that I think is into an article.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would find it useful if, you know, if we're going to have a conversation about I would find, you know, tell us what the paper is about. What is for what is structure of the paper might imply, not to get into the description, but just to get the work.
Yeah. In my abstract that I wrote before I'd done any of the book. I haven't actually not decided yet, but I started working.
Interested in the techniques of whatever. It's particularly in relation to some fields that are the subject of this conference, but also that I worked in some critical terrorism studies, critical research on political violence. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, gatekeeping, but also training about people changing political attitudes over time. Sort of pointing back to the European PhD, not to me, but you said is, you know, expectations really to set out a clear normative political positionality from the get-go and then remain consistent with that. And I think that's just like an issue with violence studies. You stay in the place of position and keep with it.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, you know, like, going to your point,
ideas change over time and our approach changes what we work on changes.
Yeah, and the whole point is to develop our understanding of issues. So I think it's a good thing to change and to evolve in that way. You know, I can relate to having, like, you know, I saw something the other day, like somebody in like a field really important to what people work on and how they work on that in a really, like, I think a really comfortable way. But like, you know, I read this comment like, but without realizing I might be guilty of that, and I thought I had a really strong ethical justification for this, what I thought was an informed stance that I had adopted in relation to I work on this child sexual abuse and I've thought about this for a long time and thought maybe so, and you know, we evolve things. And I just like I was struck by that comment about how much people are in relation to how they think about some issues. It's like, oh yeah, like, you know, based on how this person thinks about this issue, I'm one of those people. But I think, like, you know, it's part of what we work in to suggest, to think that some people just innately have an understanding of what the proper understanding or not is a really damaging way of framing it. And the other put it on. But I want to also be the police like a very sharp sort of binary distinction.
Those comments often come up. They were such random. It's really. Securing something. Stay in line, stay in the place. I think.
Inside anyways, are you gatekeeping? Or was it like, because the question was like, what
To just say, well, look, I mean, I was thinking about change, but say, I mean, and I haven't really yet in subjects with I thought you were, but I have had people say, I read this of yours all the time, I suggest you're a conservative sort of person. But, well, did you read it? You know, so people based it on titles, based on what you choose to research as well. Everyone comes at it with a whole set of assumptions and an expectation that you know everything at the outset, which I think I agree as well. Diana's point that, yeah, in that field of criminology where they cross over into cities, yeah, a lot of the gatekeeping, especially so far right, is very popular. Those types of politically loaded subject matter, you're all flooding in for this reason. So I think that's probably more useful. I know this is about but my work has focused on that. So but one of the things I've been doing for a long time is critiquing it, saying that's not working, this is terrible, the lawyers and this is bad, and it's like, well, if you want to reach the lawyers and the psychologists and psychiatrists and have them listen to you. And that's meant that recently I've wanted to focus on what's working. And it's not what works, not that, but and what's good strategy? How did you actually get a win feel? What worked? How did you, collect that evidence and prepare the case and run it and to use things that did it work and why? So that we can use models of, good pedagogy, good practices pedagogy for the lawyers, for the psychiatrists. And I think that's been a nice liberating sort of position to get to. So I think those have to be careful too of not being so critical of everything. Because things do change over time. I just, I think sometimes there's a sort of, it was 20 years ago, it was when I started studying, we're still about the same thing in relation to, say, sexual assault or cases are still crap, all of it's still crap, but a lot has changed. There's been a lot of good things that come about it. I just think, there's necessity for it, like there's always got to be content because everything's constantly changing. So you constantly have to be pushing. But there's some element, to some extent, there's almost an imaginary destination that, we'll just do this and then we're there. Oh, yeah, we'll never get there. It's just more. And I think it's about having which doesn't happen throughout your career. Sometimes you might be right in there, and other times just sitting on the sidelines. No, sorry, because go for it. Sorry, I'll digress to. It's very funny. No, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, no, I thought I had my first step with that. Well, I presented this morning on the first, results, very preliminary results of the first phase of my research right into service providers that work women on remand. And I wanted to sit on that paper, went to the other session. So thank you. I'm here for what you do. And I just reread my abstract and realized that it's similar, but it's not quite what I actually ended up doing. Yeah. So when I was doing the analysis, something I said in the presentation, I ended up naming my theme after emotions because, and I wasn't intending to do that, I wasn't expecting to do that. And that kind of thinking theoretically or academically about feelings and how they can be kind of productive, critical. I don't know anything about really, but it's just the way that the service providers that I talked about their experiences. It was all about being filled with rage and feeling, upset, what's the support women on the line that they say frustrating, full stop. And so that kind of the emotion of their professional experience was so undeniable that it ended up being what I named the theme after a bit of analysis. And I wasn't expecting that.
I don't know anything about emotions, so that's where I'm kind of like a little bit daunted about getting my head around that, because I don't think I can turn this into an article unless I understand that. Yeah.
And, you know, I would disagree about that. I think, you know, I think anybody who does so, and I find these, I like empirical thematic analysis of interview data is fantastic. It's very publishable, and the, you know, method of thematic analysis of these are my two themes. You explore them as best you can. You don't have to find somebody who's written on about emotions. No, maybe you've been too, you know, narrow about that, but you know, it's not being done. Talking to service providers about bail, so these are the themes of research. So I think in some ways you just got to let yourself write the piece, and as you progress your ideas, you'll find some research that can help explain this, and it might be there's a gap. But you don't have to find research out there who's interviewed other service providers about their emotions, but you will find something that it might be in social work, or it might be in science, or, you know, police. You just, I don't know, but you've got to think that there is good rich data there that is already the seeds of an article, in my view, that could go to Antl Journal, because they publish that, take customer. That's, you know, that's what you do when you work on, and you sort of go, I'll present it again at Antl next year. You know, it's to me that's the right, so that's the right kind of thing to do, publish, you keep presenting on, and just keep learning. You've got a strong empirical rich data. That is the rich.
I guess like I start from the data. Then as I'm exploring that, I'm trying to write that up, I'll realize what's in there that I want to go and find.
I mean, we talk about learning the data. Yeah, I was going to say that the data. Yeah, so it's not written about, you know, the emotion in our research and project. About, you know, emotion impact from the research side. But that's
So like, sorry. So like, I think like what's knocking down is your work, maybe what you did, how you did it, what you found. That's what they think about. So people, I think it would be the task, the next task is like, how do I find somebody that is, and you start thinking about the time of audience, and you may make information about the audience. The audience might be those people who have worked on emotion in some way, emotion, justice, that, and maybe just being able to say like something like that, or their focus on being on emotions.
Yeah, I think what I've been thinking about what is like that inability or like impossibility of separating emotion from professional life, which I feel like are encouraged to do a lot like work-life balance, don't think you're not going to do blah blah blah. But what I got from the service providers was that it's just not like realistic, because their work is so relational, so like about building trust and like human connection, that, but then the flip side of them doing like really important valuable work that will tell, because they can't separate, not physically separate the emotions from the professional life.
maybe you want to speak to patients. Maybe
Like that, I think like they might win.
yeah, it's, you know, there are journals that are journal by
Yeah, I was feel like yes, but the work I did it.
Right, and have a look at your. Yeah, I suppose I mean, I suppose go back to the figure during criminology. Present as you the first time. How did you present here for the first time on this research?
Yeah, I mean, I presented it.
Yeah, so then, you know, I suppose I would stick in my hometown and say, and I don't think you necessarily have to go and look for other journals. But the audience is us and the practitioners and hands-on and very practitioner focus. And a lot of people will be interested in what service providers have to say about that. And then I was wanting to hear about what they say. Or that will happen or they will whatever. And like that, I don't know about that. What do we know? So, you know, I think, you know, you've got to be with scholars very work. Don't have to worry about that so much. And I guess it's that, but it is that hesitation that until I've read this and understand that fully, I can't write and publish it.
That there is just kind of like the anxiety of like, it was coming back to being like, you know, we're talking about analysis doesn't make sense. I don't know, that's just like.
So this is this little green red devil on your shoulder. This is the person who says that word doesn't go away. Because that's what I've been talking about, the embarrassment around the writing, the constant, you know, and you just repress that imposters. It's this thing that goes away. Yeah, first of all, let the matter speak for itself. What do they say? And how do they say it? And what can you make of it? But until you sort of say, this is what they said, and here's my data set, and these are the interesting things, and there's 20 things, but sort of, you know, I've got to do this wrestling with my data, and I can't present everything. And when you get to that point, you know, you'll be further progressive over years as well. You won't be sitting here with the same outcome. So you have to trust that your writing journey is partly, you know, your thinking journey develops. Yeah. So, yeah. And don't worry about those reviewers. Just right now, that's not. Yeah. They'll be your. I mean, your community of scholars is here. They're, you know, we are looking for us to review the articles.
What is my main message? And you can't do it. The message is quite there, then you need to go somewhere else further. Yeah. But if you can say what your main message is now, then that's enough for the paper. Just to do one thing.
Sorry, go on.
It was the worst moment ever to go down and to everything. When I read that, the abstract was like, okay, but there's like 5 bits. So it was like I reread this abstract and I was like, oh, that's so yeah. So, oh, COVID. Okay, social workers. It was really absurd. Like, just choose one and each of them will.
Yeah. So what we'll after that second one, what is main message? Yeah. And doing like the workshopping, what would it be? Where would it start? The 25 weeks.
I was going to suggest as well, in a little bit well, a problem statement. That's something I was just saying. This is why it's important that there's a gap in knowledge in this area, and therefore this is what I did. So it's not even, and then you've just got some preliminary findings, you know, but you don't have to run a whole thesis up front or down.
Yeah, look, what is my main message? It's necessarily a thesis statement.
No,
What am I trying to say in this paper?
Yeah.
What are the limits? Where am I drawing a circle around this? What I'm looking at.
Right. So it's not necessarily like.
You expect for them to talk about, describe and understand the code.
I guess I see the frustration that causing writing in terms of like just kind of practical things like obviously in operations during COVID when you don't know like someone's on the line, so know it like they just like being released this year like the stuff fine and didn't know stuff like that. But I guess it surprised me how much they took on as like feeling it as an individual responsibility. When I named the paper, I tried to be better than systems that failed them, which is one of the quotes, and I like like child protection, prisons, police, everything's taking it all onto their own shoulders because they wanted better for these women that she was working with.
So what I reckon is that, you know, the mental load is really important that you're outside of that. And I don't think it's easier talking about mental load and impact, like emotional impact on students. And that's, you know, for a large audience, that's the contribution. And it captures what the data is describing to you.
But if you think people, there has been a lot of work, I guess, around family violence and back interview and surveys and interviews. If you were to look at some of that literature, have they been talking about that sort of thing? If not, then you know, then there's sort of point of distinction. There's been a journal of studies recently looking at the impact of COVID on service providers in relation to domestic family violence, but nothing on information to demand. And they didn't find what I found. And I think the quote is an excellent way. You were just telling the story of this woman and I speak about her shouldering the burden of the sort of intersecting or multiple intersecting burdens of the system. She's shouldering the weight of the responsibility. She's doing everything and she can't cope with it anymore. And it's about burnout and everything. But you know, so something unique about their experiences that you found. And I think, you know, I don't have to wrap it up much more in a environment. You know, if there's no sort of that is, you know, in some ways that's enough, and you'll get further down that track of exploring it as the
Are you PhD structures that we like cumulative formulate the papers and then sum it up, or is it like you're writing a book and maybe this what
Maybe I'm like decency as well, getting from the oh god, I need theory to explain every single thought that I'm having.
Yeah. I think that is what is my main message. It does take us to the, you know, it brings us always to the difficulty of identifying the one thing that we're talking about. We'll often like write a paper and realize we've got 3 papers, 2 papers, you know, let's put it down to the paper. And identifying the one thing and limiting it to one thing is hard because you want to say everything, you want to show them all this stuff and tell them that, tell them all that, you know. But it's really, and of course, when you're thinking through the thesis, want to put all of that in too. So I think it's a kind of yeah, it's just being reassured that just one message is enough. One paper. You just make it clear. This is one. This is what this paper is doing. That's it. Don't overlook the data speak. This is yeah. And this is why it matters. This is why I think it's important. This is why it's important to share with you. So that again, who's the audience that we share it with? Knowledge in this space. Why do we want to know this? Why do we want to know? I think this time a lot of students are able to say, yeah, I've never asked college for anything, but I always and the other stuff on the back of them.
I like
Ways
it.
in which we can reduce our words.
Okay, I put it in one of my like Intl research question drafts, and like just say how.
You know, it's like that, and there's no one way of framing design. So,
Slide, Dave. This one, coal miner.
I don't know how many books I read about writing and things. I read, you know, this, so somebody wrote, you know, writing is one long continuous mistake. And just another one. And the other one was, species barriers to writing. I can't write until I know all about the field. I can't write until I've done this. I can't write until, you know, that's this, yeah. Like, yes, because there's a whole thing about standing around all day talking about how fun it is. We do that, don't we? I'm possibly doing it till I've done this. That's right. Just do it.
Twitter page I follow called Writers, no, plumbers spoke like writers. And it's a plumber going, you know, I never dreamed of being a plumber. And I can't tell you how I plumb. The inspiration of how I plumb.
Human rights institution where try to.
Oh, yeah, that's a shame. They do very fast. Yeah. No.
We forgot we still had guests online. We've wrapped up this session and see you in the next one.